All right. Well, check it out, everybody. I've got a pen and a phone, just like the president. But this is really cool, actually, because if you look very closely, especially all in the front, if you look at my pen and my phone, just like the president, these have absolutely no authority to create laws in this country.
Yeah. That's right.
Isn't that amazing?
Yep.
We're going to start off tonight by talking just a little bit about executive orders because a lot of people have been asking me about them lately. Apparently, not everybody is convinced that what the president is doing is exactly legal.
No.
Don't know why that could be, but it's true. So, to start off, Barack Obama is not the first president to issue an executive order. That is a tradition that goes all the way back to George Washington. So the issue is not that he's writing these executive orders, it's what he's trying to do with the executive orders that is the problem. An executive order, properly used, is basically just a formal way for the president to request that something be done within the executive branch. So, he might issue an executive order to the Defense Department saying that he wants them to give him a new report on a project that they're working on. That is an executive order. He can even go crazy and issue an executive order to the White House staff declaring that Friday shall be Hawaiian Shirt Day. That is an executive order. However, he has absolutely no authority whatsoever to issue an executive order that creates, changes, or alters our domestic policies in any way whatsoever.
That's right.
That power does not exist.
That's right.
Look, we got to change the way we see our president in this country. And not this president, not Barack Obama, but every president. Because the way our Constitution is designed, the president in this country is not a policy maker. He is a facilitator. He's an administrator. To steal the words of Roger Sherman, one of our founders, he said the job of the president is basically to take the will of Congress and put it into effect. And that's it. But because most people don't understand our Constitution, this president has been able to defy Congress and impose his will on the American people in a lot of different policy areas. And in ways that affect you personally. You see why we need to understand the Constitution? We don't need to understand the Constitution because it's a cute tradition that we've had for 200 years and it makes you a good American if you study it. We don't need to understand it because it's a part of a civics class and it's something that we should study in school. We should understand the Constitution first and foremost as an act of self-defense. Because the United States Constitution is the single best protection you can have from the people in your government.
That's right.
Now, with everything that's going on in the world today, let's think about this. NSA spying, IRS targeting, the mess in Massachusetts with the little girl in the hospital. Does everybody know about this? Okay, I love this. Very informed audience. This is great. That mess in Massachusetts, Venezuela, Ukraine. Do I need to stop here and explain to you why you need to be protected from the people in your government? Yes? Okay, I got blank stares. I'm like, okay, maybe I should go back a little bit. It's pretty clear why we need to be protected from the people in government. And the single best protection that the world has ever known from the people in government is the United States Constitution. And if you'll give me your attention for about the next 45 minutes, I will change the way you see our Constitution forever. Does this sound like a good plan? I love this. The more energy you have, the more fun we have. So feel free. I like audience participation. I like energy. Now what we're going to do tonight is the Constitution as ratified. So that means how it was intended to work, the way it was written. This is a very important distinction to make. Because a lot of people see what we go through here tonight, and they will say, that doesn't look anything like what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. And that's the problem. You see, the Constitution's designed to protect you from the government, right? So the further and further we get away from that Constitution, that means there's less and less to protect you, and it becomes easier and easier for the people in government to take away your freedom. That's why we need to understand how the Constitution works. Now, if you want to understand that, the first thing that you need to study and really master is human nature. Is everybody familiar with human nature? And everybody laughs. I love it. It's a bit, basically it's our instinct, for lack of a better term, right? The way we behave naturally. Who can give me an aspect of human nature? Greed. Yeah. Bingo. Power. Revenge is, actually, that's a good one. I've never heard that one before. Revenge, power, greed. Pride. That's a good one too, especially from a little guy. That was awesome. Anybody else? Laziness. Yeah, we're always going to do the easiest way out, right? Nobody's going to work harder than they have to, generally. The best answer, by the way, I've ever heard to this, we did this for a homeschool group about 3 months ago. A little kid in the front row yells out, "Lost!" And I look down and Mom's going, that was funny. Well, we're going to focus on 3 aspects of human nature in particular tonight. They are, and the reason why we're going to focus on these 3 in particular is because they have a particular impact on the Constitution. We're going to focus on our love of power and our love of money, so greed, because they're basically the same thing. Am I on the right? I had this all mixed up and then, sorry about that. Okay. The other one is self-preservation. I've never come up with a better term for this, but it's basically that idea that you have a tendency to protect yourself from outside danger, right? So if you feel a threat or somebody attacks you, what's your first instinct? Defend yourself, right? So self-preservation and selfishness. We tend to be a little selfish, right? It's natural for us to care more about ourselves than we do about our neighbor. Now, what we're going to do in this presentation, if I can ever, this is the weirdest thing to try to figure out how to get that together. There we go. What we're going to do tonight in this presentation is we're going to go through each of these 3. My paperweight's a bell, did you notice? What we're going to do through the presentation tonight is we're going to go through each one of those aspects of human nature and look at how they impact the way our Constitution works. And as we do that, it's going to show us what the structure of our government should be and exactly how much power the federal government can have. So we're going to do basically an overview of the Constitution. And what we're going to do is give you a foundation for what you need to know before you can learn everything else. And once you understand these things, the structure and the size of the government, interpreting those individual clauses gets much, much easier. So what I'd like you to do is, after we're done here tonight, if you're trying to interpret a given clause in the Constitution by yourself, go back and refer to what we talked about tonight, and it's going to help lead you in the right path, and it's going to kick out a lot of the bad interpretations that we see today. So that's what we're going to do. Now, the question is, why did I say that human nature is at the core of understanding the Constitution? Why is it really that important? Well, we know that people are going to behave that way. More importantly, we know that the people that we elect to government are going to have a tendency to behave that way, aren't they? Not only that, but we know that that's never going to change. Right? What's one of the things that the founders were trying to deal with at the Constitutional Convention? They're trying to figure out, how do we deal with greedy people? Do we still have greedy people today? Right? A couple, maybe. Right? We've had greedy people since the beginning of time, and we will have greedy people until the end of time. That will never change. So if we know that people have a tendency to behave that way, and we know that that will never change, it only makes sense that we would design our government and our Constitution with those things in mind, and with an idea to protect ourselves from those negative aspects of human nature. Pretty brilliant, right? This, by the way, as an aside, is also why this argument that you hear, well, the Constitution's outdated, right? It doesn't matter anymore, it's just old and antiquated. This is why that argument is nonsense. It's because our Constitution is based on human nature, and human nature does not change. So let's look at, to illustrate how this human nature thing works, let's take a look at power to start off with. It's natural for people to like power, right? And what happens when you get a little power? You usually want more, don't you? You've experienced this in your own life, probably. I know I have. You get that promotion at work. Somebody asks you to be a part of a head of a committee at church or a club that you're a part of. And you get that little ego boost, don't you? You start thinking, I'm not such a bad guy after all, huh? That's human nature. And the way the founders used that to protect us is really brilliant. They gave us 3 branches of government. Now, who can tell me the 3 branches? Wow, that was almost in unison. I always hold my breath when I do that because I did this for a high school once. And I come out all excited. Who can tell me the 3 branches of government? Silence. Or you could be like Chuck Schumer and say, hey, we have 3 branches of government, a House, a Senate, and a President. Mind you, the same guy who thinks Thomas Jefferson wrote the Bill of Rights and wants to tinker with the First Amendment. That's not scary at all. Alright, so we got legislative, executive, and judicial. And it could even stay on the screen, would even be better. I'm sorry, I normally don't have problems with this, but we could get it. There we go. Ah, yay. Alright. Believe it or not, this was not an accident. The founders had a very good reason for why they gave us 3 branches of government. It's because there are 3 jobs that any government has to be able to perform or it cannot function. It has to be able to make laws, enforce laws, and judge laws. Think about it. We got a lot of people in this room tonight. We could declare ourselves a government. And we could sit here all night long and write a bunch of laws, couldn't we? We'd have a good old time. We could also, in that process, decide that we are the only ones capable of deciding what those laws mean. But eventually, our little library government's going to fall apart because we can't go outside this room and enforce those laws. So because we don't have all 3 functions of government, our government's going to fall apart. The same is true in the real world. So what the founders did is they give each branch a different function of government. That means that no one branch has enough power to run the government on its own.
That's right.
All 3 have to cooperate before anything can get done. So let's say we get a Congress who wants to take us off in some weird, tyrannical, oppressive direction. They can... You act like that would ever happen. Let's just say. Stretch your imagination for a minute. They wouldn't be able to do that unless the other 2 branches are willing to cooperate. They're more than willing, that's right. But the idea is, no one branch can do it on their own. And I know, so far, this is very basic for a lot of you, especially a knowledgeable audience like this. However, it's critical that we not only understand how the separation of powers works, right, because we're talking separation of powers, it's critical that we not only understand how this works, but why, and be able to explain the impact to our friends and family. Because what the founders are trying to do here is they're trying to make sure that no one of these branches of government, so no one group of people or no one person can grab a hold of that government and run it on its own. Because in that case, what they can do is if one group of people gets corrupted, they can go off in that tyrannical direction. There's nobody to stop them. This is a critical idea because we've got a president right now that thinks he should be able to write himself some laws, don't we? And what do half the people in this country say? They go, oh, well, you know, he won the election, so he can do whatever he wants, right, man? This is what you hear. Pretty much, right? That's very dangerous because whenever he says he wants to write a law or change the law, as he does so often with things like the health care bill and whatever, what he's doing is he's amassing more and more power in this executive branch and getting closer and closer to that point where the president and the executive branch can run the government on their own. When that becomes the case, that means that your freedom stands at the mercy of one man. So your freedom hinges on the character of the person in the White House. That's a dangerous situation to be in, isn't it, folks? Because as soon as that guy decides that he wants to go in an oppressive direction and take away your freedom, there is nothing to stop him. So what we're trying to do with this separation of powers is we're trying to put as many barriers as we can between our politicians and our freedom. So what we do here is we say, before you can take away our freedom, you have to corrupt all three branches. But when we break down that separation of powers, every time that president decides to make a new law, he's taking away one of those barriers and getting the politicians closer and closer to your freedom. That is why separation of powers is absolutely critical to our freedom in this country. Now we're going to talk about another issue that you've probably heard a lot about before, but again, it's critical to understand exactly why it works. And that's separation of powers. Or not separation of powers, checks and balances, but they're connected, right? Checks and balances, you've all heard of this, right? It basically means that all three branches have a set of tools that they can use to rein in the other two branches. So Congress goes in that tyrannical direction, the other two branches can rein them back in. That's separation of powers. Let's look at how that would work. Say the legislative branch, they got a lot of power, they think they deserve more. Human nature, right? Well, they already have all of the legislative power. So there's only one way they can get more power. They have to take the executive or the judicial power from somebody. So let's say in this case they try to take away the power from the president. Funny thing about that president, he likes power too. So what's his natural reaction going to be when somebody imposes on him and tries to take his power away? Veto. Basically, he's going to push back. He's going to put them back in their place, isn't he? So he's going to keep them at their appropriate size. And the same thing's going to happen in the other two branches because they like power too. It's amazing how that works when you understand human nature. Basically what we're doing here is we're creating a perfect equilibrium where no one branch of government can get too big without the other two acting to put it back in place. It's kind of a self-limiting organization here. That's what we're trying to create. It's a brilliant system. But there's still a problem here, isn't there? You're all kind of looking at me like, what is the problem? What happens if all three branches get together and they say, you know, we grow this entire federal government, then there'd be more power for all of us to share. So how do we solve that? Because that's really the problem we're facing right now, isn't it? We got all three of them working together to try to grab more and more and more power, don't we? And nobody's standing up to say a word about it.
That's right.
Who said that? You've seen this before. He's getting ahead of me over here. This is great. Yes, the founders did have a plan to solve this, believe it or not. If you look down here in our illustration, this is where we find our state governments. Coincidentally, it's also where we find the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is critical to understanding how the Constitution works. So we're going to stop right here and make sure that you understand exactly how the 10th Amendment works. So, raise your hand if you like candy. Nice. Now, raise your hand if you like candy and you're willing to help me with an illustration. Let's see. Who wants to have some fun? Keep your hands up. We're going to have some fun here. Okay, yeah, why don't you come up? She's blushing already, so this has got to be fun. You got to come all the way up on stage, though.
Okay.
There's stairs over here. What's your name? Kayla?
Yeah.
Everybody say hi to Kayla. Give her a big round of applause. I think what I love most about this is she is going to kill her dad when she gets back to the seat. All right, Kayla, what's your favorite kind of candy? Reese's? Ah, close. I brought Kit Kat. You like Kit Kat? All right, she's excited. So you like these? Okay, well the bad news is these are mine. It's true. I actually stopped and got these on the way here, so these are mine. But the good news is I'm a very generous person and I would be willing to share one with you. Would you like a piece? Okay. Now, how much of my candy candy do you think you have permission to eat? Not how much do you want to eat, how much do you have permission to eat? There's a big difference there. Anybody else? How much candy does she have permission to eat? One piece, right? Because that's what I gave her. Now, if she wants to have more candy, what does she need to do?
Beg.
She and I are on the same page. So if she wants to ask to have more, she needs to come and ask me for more, right?
Right.
This is just common courtesy.
Right.
Common sense, right? This isn't difficult. Well, the 10th Amendment says that all power not delegated to the United States by the Constitution is reserved to the states or to the people. So imagine that this candy is the power of the American people. And Kayla, is the federal government. She doesn't want to do it anymore. You did lose a lot of friends on that. So the candy is the power of the federal government, or power of the people. Kayla is the federal government. Essentially, what we did with the Constitution is we said, you know what, federal government? You can have that much of our power. All of this is still ours.
That's right.
And if you would like to have more of it, you need to come and ask us for more, which you can do through the amendment process.
Right.
That is how the Constitution works, and that is how our power is delegated. Thank you very much, by the way. You're a great sport. Wasn't she awesome? She's going right into it. Do you want another one? Does anybody else want a piece of candy? Oh, do you think I can? Oh, here we go. Incoming. I don't know if I can make it that far. You ready? All right, here's the deal. I'm going to come out and give you all a piece of candy, but first of all, you got to make a promise to me. After we're done, you have to go to Julie and tell her you did a really good job, and she should have me back. Fair deal?
Fair deal.
Yeah, why not? All right. By the way, that's a perfect illustration of our current political process. Right? Hand out candy, ask for votes. That's how it works. Although I got to admit, it's not a perfect illustration, because if I was a real politician, like I bought that with my own money. If I was a politician, I would have stolen it from a baby or something on the way in. But I didn't. It's my own candy, I promise. All right, so that's the 10th Amendment. It's common sense. 10th Amendment says that the only power that these people have is that power that we intentionally granted to them. So any power that we didn't give to these people belongs to the states or to you and me. So that makes it 100% absolutely impossible for the federal government to do something that is outside of the Constitution without infringing on the power of the states. Now let's try, again, I'm going to ask you to stretch your imagination, but imagine that the federal government did do something unconstitutional. It could happen. Hey, it could happen.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, people often ask me, what do you think is, can you give me an example of where we're not following the Constitution? I always say, I can give you a couple where they are. It's a shorter list. Pretty much we're really hardcore about inaugurating that president before noon on January 20th. That's about it. Alright, so let's say that the federal government does try to do something unconstitutional and they infringe on the power of those states. The funny thing about those people who run the states, do you know what they like? They like candy and power. Just like anybody else. So as soon as that federal government starts to encroach on their power, their natural reaction is going to be to push back and push that federal government right back into its proper size. Now, does anybody know how the states would do that? Now, we're talking Constitution as ratified, so originally. And Marika, you can't answer because you know the answer. What's that?
Attorney General.
Well, that's what they're trying now, which is, go ahead.
Nullification.
Everybody says that. That's an interesting thing because of what we're going to talk about. But yeah, nullification is what we're trying now, right?
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court would work, theoretically. Anybody know originally, though?
Article 5.
These are all, this is great because it illustrates why we're a little bit out of whack. Article 5 convention, go ahead.
State legislatures?
Bingo. He's close, right? You're right on. Originally, half of this Senate, the legislature, which would be the Senate, was appointed by state legislatures. Yep, now we're seeing it, see? Originally, the intention and the purpose of the Senate was to represent the interests of the states in the federal government. Which only makes sense because everything that our federal government does affects the ability of these states to operate. So it only makes sense that they should have a say in what the federal government does. Now, when half of this, of Congress, is represented by the states, that means that any time the federal government wanted to do anything, they had to get permission from the states first. Now, how likely do you think those states are to approve something that takes away their own power? Not going to happen, right? So this is the point where you say, okay, I'm with you, Chad. This sounds great. I love it in theory, but obviously it's not working because the federal government is huge. What went wrong? Melody already told us. In 1913, we ratified the 17th Amendment. 17th Amendment says that our senators will now be elected by you and me, and not by the states. So now, we've gotten rid of this big, important check on the federal government. And there's nothing to keep it from growing, just exponentially. And if you want to pinpoint when the federal government really got out of control, you can almost nail it down to 1913. Believe it or not, the state and local governments spent more money than the federal government until the 1930s. Did you know that? The federal government was normally the small one. So that is separation of powers and checks and balances. The founders knew that it was human nature for people to love power. So they pitted the politicians' love of power against itself to make sure that the federal government and no one branch of the federal government could get too big. When the federal government can't get too big, when it stays at the appropriate size, it can't get into your personal life, and it doesn't have the power to take away your freedom. Remember, the Constitution's designed very specifically to protect you from your government. And if you remember nothing else I say tonight, remember that. That is the purpose of our Constitution. So let's move on to self-preservation. Right? We have the tendency to try to keep ourselves out of trouble, to protect ourselves from outside danger. And the way the founders used that is very interesting for me anyway. If you look down at the bottom of this illustration, this is where you find we the people. And there are a lot of us. There's what, 317 million now, something like that? There's so many of them that we can't even fit inside the screen. So there's about 317 million of us now. James Wilson, one of our founders, said if you look at the structure of our government, it makes a pyramid. If you look, he was right. At its most basic level, this is the structure of our government. And you'll notice that we, the people, are at the bottom. That is because we are the source of political power. We have the most power in this country. So say that again. We are the source of political power. I know when you look at the people in D.C. now, they like to pretend that they're the ones in charge and they tell us what to do. But the bottom line is it's the reverse. Any power that a government higher up in this illustration has, it only has because we have granted it to them. It is ours, they are borrowing it. That's the bottom line.
We want it back.
Exactly. We want it back, and I'm going to show you why we need to get it back. Because the bottom line here, we have the most power. The people are the foundation of this country, so it only makes sense that we make up the foundation of the pyramid. Pretty simple. But if you go up one level, this is where we find our local governments, and these are the ones that I've seen Julie posting so much about on Facebook, and a lot of you are working so hard on, right? Your counties, your townships. Do you have townships in Texas? I haven't even figured that out. I'm from Illinois, so I don't even know. Now that's a Texas phrase. I like that. She said, bless your heart. You don't know the half of it. Okay, not townships, but whatever you have that's equivalent to townships, counties, school boards, city councils, all those local governments that we're all used to. We can trust them with the second most power because they are the closest to us and they are the easiest to hold accountable. For example, think about your city council. If they pass a law that is really, really oppressive and gets involved in your personal life, and it raises your taxes to some ridiculous amount, those people know that they're going to see you at the grocery store. They will see you at high school football games. Oh, they're going to see you. And you can ask them questions. And they don't like that. They know that if they pass a law that monkeys with your personal life, that they're going to have to justify that to your face. That is a very effective deterrent from silly legislation. And if you don't believe me, I can prove it to you right now. And be honest with me. Raise your hand if you drive differently when there's a police car behind you. Right? When you're in a back road somewhere and you don't think there's anybody around, you're eating the cheeseburger and you're hitting the radio, but man, you see those lights and all of a sudden it's 10 and 2, right? Our politicians aren't any different. They behave much differently when they think you're watching them. And when we make decisions on that local level, it gives you the opportunity to watch your politicians and have an impact on the laws that you live under. Another reason we can trust them with the second most power is they live in your town. They know what your life is like, and they're impacted by the same things. They care that there's a pothole over here on Precinct Road because they drive over the same stupid pothole, it annoys them, and they want to get it fixed. Not only that, but since they know what your problems are, they can come up with tailored solutions that are addressing your specific problems, which is a much more effective and efficient way to deal with things. So for all those reasons, we can trust our local politicians with the second most power. Now you move up one level, this is where you find your state governments. They're a little bit further away from the people, so they get a little bit less power. Right? You're not bumping into your local or your state representatives on a regular basis. They probably don't live in your town. Right? I know Connie fairly well, and I'd have a hard enough time getting a hold of her because she's all over the place, isn't she? I love her to death, but she's so hard to get a hold of. She's the best, isn't it? Right? I thought I would get a... I have to give her a hard time because I love Connie. She's the best. Right. But she's a good example. She's a great, will make a great senator once she's elected. But she's not as easy to get a hold of as your city council member. So we don't want to give her quite as much power as somebody local. Not only that, but your state senators aren't legislating for your specific town. They're creating legislation for the entire state of Texas. So the solutions aren't tailored to your town. Right? You might have a problem here in DFW, but the problem in El Paso is much different. It's harder to come up with a solution that works for both places. So we don't want to give them the same amount of power. So that's your state government. If you move up one more level, it's where we find the federal government. The furthest away from the people, so it gets the least amount of power, right? We're doing great on that nowadays, aren't we? But we want to give them the least amount of power because they are ridiculously, almost impossibly hard to hold accountable. If nothing else, look at it this way. When is the last time you were walking through the mall and you went, oh my gosh, it's the president! I'm going to go talk to him! I can almost guarantee you that that will never happen in your lifetime. You will never walk into an Applebee's and go, oh my gosh, it's the Speaker of the House! I got to go talk to Speaker Boehner right now! This will never ever happen to you. Another way to look at that. Look at all the people we have in this room. We could take this group of people to the city council here in town, probably get our voice heard. We might not change the opinion of the council, but at least we'd be heard. We could take a group 100 times the size to Capitol Hill, and we would get laughed at. they would not even let us in the building, would they? It is almost impossible to have your voice heard at a federal level. So we don't want to give them that much power. Not only that, but think about it. They don't know what your life is like. Anybody here think Nancy Pelosi knows what it's like to live in North Texas? Right? She didn't have a clue. Yeah, she can stay out of North Texas for all I'm concerned. But the bottom line is, the vast majority of the people in Congress, just think about this, the vast majority of the people in Congress don't even live in your state.
That's right.
Now, consider the differences in culture and climate between Texas and Alaska. Do you think the people in Alaska have any clue what it's like to live in Texas?
No.
Do they know what it's like or what to do when a road buckles because it was like 120 degrees for 14 days straight? They don't know what to do. So why should their representatives be deciding how we deal with our roads? That doesn't make any sense.
No.
But what do we do today? We've been giving more and more of our power. We're taking it away from the people down here and giving it up to the people in the federal government. We're taking the most personal decisions in our lives. Think about it. Roads, education, health care. The most personal decisions in your life, and we're giving those decisions to the people who know the least amount about you and are the least accountable to you. That is insane. What we want to do is keep these decisions down here at a local level, because that gives you the greatest amount of power possible to have a say in the laws that you live under. And when you do that, you can take control of your life. When you have control over your own life, that, ladies and gentlemen, is freedom. That's what we're going for. So, tell the NSA I wasn't here. My name is John Smith. For all of you. So, that's why we want to keep these decisions at a local level. Now, really quickly, this is why I love this illustration so much, is it's going to help you to visualize things. It shows you very clearly that the further away you get from the people, you can trust them with less and less power. So as you're trying to remember how everything interrelates, it helps you to visualize that concept very quickly and very easily. And it's not something that you have to study. So I really love this illustration. It can tell you so much more about the Constitution if we had time. But that one's a key. So basically, the founders knew that self-preservation was a part of human nature. So what they did was, clearly the Constitution doesn't speak specifically to local government, and it speaks very little to state governments. But how this shows up in the Constitution, the founders only gave those powers to the federal government that absolutely have to be dealt with at that level. That leaves the most important decision-making and the vast majority of the decision-making to be made here at the state and local level. And when they do that, that gives you the ability to impact the laws that you live under and take control of your own life. Again, the Constitution's designed very specifically to protect you from the government. Now, this is where we get to the selfishness aspect, which is still over there, see? So now we get to selfishness. This is the part where I get to blow your mind. And I love this part because it's so much fun. It's natural for us to do what's best for ourselves before we do what's best for our neighbors, right? That's just human nature. Agreed? That also, though, poses a very big problem in a representative republic like ours. Because we send people to Washington, D.C. to represent our interests in Washington, right?
Yeah.
But they're always going to do what's best for themselves. But they're supposed to represent us. How do we ever get somebody to go to Washington and do what's best for us? Does anybody know the answer to this? And here's the question. If these people are always going to do what's best for themselves, how do we ever get these people to truly represent these people? Vote them out is a good start. There's only one answer to this, though. Well, there it is. What was your name?
Betty Graham.
Betty's the one that got it right. Believe, that's amazing. This is brilliant, and I can say that because I didn't come up with it. This is straight from the founders. The only way to get these people to actually represent these people is to make sure that these people are these people. Our politicians must be citizens in every sense of the word possible.
Were you born here?
Actually, in this case, no. We need to make sure that their interests are tied to our interests, so that what's good for them is good for us, and what's bad for us is bad for them. Because that way, when they go to Washington, D.C. and do what's best for themselves, which we know they're going to do, that they'll naturally do what's best for us, whether they want to or not.
That's right.
That's the key. So what does all that mean? How do we get them to be citizens in every sense humanly possible? I know. Actually, we need to get them to live under the laws that they pass. They must know that every law they pass will apply to them in the exact same way it applies to you and me. And if you're taking notes, this is where you bold and underline and 18-point font this thing, because this is critical. James Madison said that this is the single greatest protection of your freedom that you can possibly have. So if we were going to throw out the entire Constitution and save one thing, this is it. And here's why it's so important. Because it means that unless our politicians are willing to take away their own freedom, they can't take away yours either. That is a very powerful protection of your freedom.
But how do they get away with it?
But it doesn't say that in the Constitution.
Passing laws that they don't.
Exactly.
They exempt themselves from a lot of laws.
Exactly. He's a step ahead of me. He says, how do they get away with it? What do we do today, right? We give them special pensions. We give them.
Don't. They take it.
They take it. Well, they give themselves. We'll say they give themselves special pensions, special health care.
Yeah, they don't have Obamacare.
Exactly. No term limit. And they get the insider trading thing. Oh, that hacks me off. They get exemption from laws like that that are just too hard for a congressman to follow. Right? We can't expect that from them. They're delicate little flowers. We can't expect them to follow insider trading laws. Since I'm on a good time, you want to hear something that'll really hack you off? I found out about this one. Did you know they have a special hotline into the airlines? So that if they need to change flights, they can call directly to the airline, and the airline knows it's a congressman and they have to get what they want. And they don't have to stand in line like, you and I. Doesn't that hack you off? When I read that, first thing that went through my mind was, who do these people think they are? Right? Because they aren't these people anymore, right?
No.
They're kind of over here somewhere.
Yeah.
We've created a permanent political class that exists to do nothing but run the government.
Yep. That's right.
That's a dangerous situation for us to be in. Because imagine that there's a big corporation or a special interest group and they're pushing the bill through Congress. This bill's terrible for you and me. But he gets an exemption. So it's not going to be his problem.
That's right.
That opens us up to a possibility. You said Obamacare? I'll use that as an illustration in just a second since you brought that up. That opens him up to the possibility that this special interest group, this corporation, can come along and say, Mr. Congressman, vote for my bill. I might help you out with your campaign next time around.
Yep.
Or I'll give you some candy.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever it is that they do to influence our congressman.
Yep.
Now where does his interest lie?
Money.
Right, with the money, it's not with you, is it? Because, this bill's terrible for you, but that's not his problem. In fact, he stands to gain financially if he votes for it. So now, his interest, it's in his best interest to vote against you, to do what's bad for you. This is why we get so many silly laws that seem to be, you wonder, what were they thinking? Here's why. She mentioned the health care bill. Think about that. You had two senators, what was it? Landrieu from Louisiana and Nelson from Nebraska, is that right? They were no votes. And then suddenly found a few $100 million for their states, and they suddenly became miraculous yes votes. Is that a coincidence, or did somebody come along and go, you know, we could get this for you, vote for our bill?
Uh-huh.
Do you think they would have voted for that if they thought they were going to get the same third-rate health care you're going to get?
No.
That's why they have to live under the laws that they pass. Because if Landrieu and Nelson thought that it was their health on the line, there's no way they'd vote for that. No way. That is the problem. Now, this is the part where you say, I am so with you on this. I love this idea that they have to live by the laws they pass. I'm on board. But is that honestly in the Constitution? Is it really in there? Answer? Yes, it is. There's a variety of ways that you can get there, but I'm going to stick to two because of time constraints. Number one, we talked about the 10th Amendment, right? Unless we have granted a power intentionally to the federal government, that power does not exist. There is nothing in our Constitution that says anywhere that Congress can exempt anybody from anything. That power does not exist. Number two, if you look at the federal government, or the Federalist Papers, James Madison says, almost in as many words, Congress cannot pass a law that does not apply to themselves as well as to the people. He also says that is the greatest protection that your freedom can possibly have. It's in there. We just choose to ignore it. Well, they do. But we don't call them on it because most people don't realize that this is in there. And so because we don't understand the Constitution, we have given up one of the greatest protections we can possibly have. Now, what's awesome about that is if we know that that congressmen can only pass laws that apply to themselves as well as to you and me, that tells us exactly how much power the federal government can have. And that is awesome. Because if we know that members of Congress have, every law that is passed has to affect every congressman from Maine to Hawaii, there's only one way to make that happen, isn't there? If it has to affect every member of Congress, they can only pass laws on issues that affect the entire country. Isn't that amazing? Now you ask, again, I like this idea. Where is that in the Constitution? Who's familiar with the General Welfare Clause? Yeah, got a few, a little bit. What's that?
No.
No? Well, you're about to get familiar. And it's extremely important because this is one of the most distorted clauses in the Constitution. Generally, if they're going to do something that they don't have the power to do, they're, oh, General Welfare Clause. That's pretty much what's going to come out. General Welfare Clause is Article 1, Section 8. Basically says that Congress has the power to collect taxes for the purpose of providing for the general welfare. Now, if you ask the Supreme Court, a lawyer, a judge, what have you, they're going to tell you that that means that Congress can do anything that's good for the country. Anything that's generally for the welfare of the country. Obviously, that's nonsense, because no congressman has ever said, yeah, I voted for the bill because it's terrible for the country, man. They're never going to say that. They're at least going to lie to you and say they thought it was good for the country. So if we interpret that clause as meaning they can do whatever is generally for the welfare of the country, that means Congress has unlimited power. And if we know anything about the Constitution, we know that the founders were trying to create a limited government. So obviously, that can't be the right interpretation. Fortunately for you and me, the phrase general welfare was actually in fairly common usage in the decades leading up to the Constitution being written. So with a little research, we can find out almost exactly what it means. Unfortunately, most people in the government don't want to do that research. But I did. Fortunately for you. When the founders wrote Article 1, Section 8, and what they were saying is, Congress has the power to collect taxes for the purpose of providing for the general, think generic, think common, welfare of the entire country. The purpose here, in this, using that phrase, is to exclude the ability to do things in the specific interest of individual states, of individual regions, of individual groups of people. They could not do things for the specific welfare, but only for the general welfare. And if you want to see perhaps a better way to help you visualize that is to think of it this way. Our federal government is the only government that every citizen in this country has in common. Right? We all have that one government in common. So doesn't it make sense that we would only want that federal government to do things that we all have in common? Right? This isn't rocket science. Right? It all comes down to common sense, more or less. So let's look at why that would be important. Imagine that they're building, let's say, a bike trail in North Dakota. Anybody here care if that bike trail gets built?
No.
Whatever, right? Indifferent. Gets built, doesn't get built, you'll probably never see it. Do you think your representatives care if the bike trail gets built?
No.
Probably not. That opens them up to having somebody come along and make them care. Right? So they're not voting on whether or not that bike trail is good for the country. They're voting based on who can influence them the most. That is a recipe for very wasteful and silly legislation. Right? Let's look at that from a little different perspective. Imagine that some foreign country invades North Dakota. You care?
No.
You should. Because that's putting you in danger. Now it's a threat to you. Right? Coming from a state like Illinois, I'm not too sympathetic to California, but again, it puts me in danger, and that's why I care. Right? Because if they're going to go through California, they're probably coming here at some point. And if nothing else, we're going to have to rally to say they're sorry butt. Do you think your representatives care about that? Because it threatens everything they live for, right? It threatens their job, their livelihood, everything. So every representative is going to care. That makes this much more difficult. Right? Now they're going to vote based on what's good for you and me, what's good for the country, and not based on who's influencing them. That is why national defense is a federal power. See? Pretty simple. So let's look at that. There are 4 basic categories of federal power. And I'm going to move this up real quick so that we can go through this and finish up, because I know Julie's hardcore on time, and I love that about you. So there are 4 basic categories of federal power. Number 1 is national defense. For all the reasons we just talked about. It affects everybody in the country in the same way. Because we all benefit when the country's safe and secure, right?
Right.
Number 2 is foreign trade and diplomacy. For basically the same reasons. We all benefit when we have good relations with other countries. It's a great way to keep us out of wars. It's a way of doing national defense. All those different things. So it's something that we all have in common. Something we want the federal government to handle. Third is immigration. We want to speak with one uniform voice because what one state does affects everybody. Right? Because if we have one state that's just letting anybody in, once those people are in, they can go anywhere.
That's right.
So it affects everybody in this country what we do, so it makes sense that we would speak with one uniform voice on immigration. The 4th one, and final one, which you might notice, which is staggering considering what we're doing right now, the only domestic category of federal power is to create a common economic market. So to create a free market within the country. Why would that be a federal power? Well, let's imagine that Chad can draw, and that this looks somewhat like our country. Just in case you all are worried, I'm letting my wife teach the boys art. Because you don't want me doing that. They're always going, can we paint, Daddy? I'm like, no, wait till Mommy comes home. Because you don't want me a part of that. Okay, so let's say this looks like the United States. And Georgia puts a tax on everything it imports from South Carolina. Perfect, I'm right on time. So South Carolina gets really mad about that. So they put a tax on everything from Georgia. And then Georgia puts a tax on everything from South Carolina. And they go back and forth, and they get really angry. And now they have a fractured relationship. That will weaken our union. We cannot have that. Especially at the beginning of our country, that type of an issue would destroy our country. So what they did was, all the powers in this category, if you look at all the domestic powers that the federal government has, they all relate to creating a common economic market where goods and services can move freely and easily from one state to the next. They all relate to making it easy to do business across state borders. For example, I'll give you one really quickly. Think about weights and measures. That's in there.
Yeah.
It says that the federal government gets to decide what our weights and measures are. Why? Well, because if everybody's using pounds, it's a lot easier to do business across state lines. All of the powers, if you go through Article 1, Section 8, anything domestic, you'll see relates to that. So those are the 4 categories of federal power. And again, if you refer back to these when you're interpreting the Constitution, things get very simple. One last thing, because I love rules of thumb that make things very simple. One of the things James Madison said, he boiled down federal power even further. He said the federal government has the power to do those things that are external to state borders. The state governments do everything internal to state borders. So anything that is not contained by a state border is federal power. Anything that is contained by a state border is a state power. And if you look at the 4 categories, it follows. It makes perfect sense. National defense is out here, unless somebody invades, in which case they're still crossing a state border. Foreign trade and diplomacy, out here. Immigration along the borders. Creating a common economic market, again, until it crosses state borders, it's not an issue for the federal government. Everything the federal government does is about crossing state borders so that those things are not contained by a state border. Very simple. So the founders knew that it was our human nature to do those things that were best for ourselves before we do what's best for others. So they required that politicians had to live under the laws that they pass, because that means if they wouldn't do something to themselves, they couldn't do it to you either. And that is the best protection of your freedom you can ever have. Again, the Constitution is designed very specifically to protect you from the government. Now, before I close, I want to tell you a couple of quick things. One, follow up with me after this. Connect with me. We can do Facebook, Twitter, and if you go to my website, it's chadkentspeaks.com. If you can't remember that, I have business cards over there. Yeah, and Chrissy's like, sign up for your newsletter. You can sign up for my newsletter as well. One way or another, find a way to connect with me on Facebook and Twitter, and we can keep talking after this. Number 2, does everybody know about The Blaze? Blaze.com, The Blaze Radio, and all that? All right. I do a segment every Saturday on The Blaze Radio about the Constitution on the Chris Salcedo Show. That show airs between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on Saturdays on The Blaze Radio. Please catch that live. I generally come in about 10 to 1 is about when I'm on. If not, go to my website. On the blog tab, I post every one of those segments, and they are phenomenal. They're well worth your time. I'm normally not good at patting myself on the back, but these are good. So definitely take a look at those. Also, I do have a book on the back table. These are $10. It's a very quick read. It's fun, but you will learn more than you ever imagined. It will definitely make you think. You might not agree with everything, but it will make you think. And if you want my opinion, it's worth the $10 just for Chapter 3. It is the best illustration of your rights that you will ever see. So there's that. Those are $10. And I also have Brian McClanahan's Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution back there, which is $15. If you read them both, you will get a fantastic foundation in the Constitution for relatively little effort. But whatever you do, whether you use my materials or somebody else's, please build on what we've done here tonight. Because I feel like I've given you a pretty good foundation in the Constitution tonight. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I've got about two minutes left if you'll bear with me. But if we just keep that information in our head and don't let it get out, what we did here was more or less worthless, right? We need to allow that information to influence us as we talk to our politicians, as we talk to Connie, as we talk to whomever, and to allow us to inspire other people to join the liberty movement. And if we do that, then what we did here, there's just no limit to the value it can have. So I want to challenge you, before you leave this room, decide what you're going to do to take that next step to learn more about the Constitution. Now I want to leave you with one last quick story before I go. Like I mentioned, I am from Illinois. Rockford. But not too long ago, my wife and I decided we were going to make the decision to move my family from Illinois to Texas. And for the record, I'm anybody in here with a shirt that said, "Don't California my Texas"? I am so with you. As soon as we got here, I'm like, what are these out-of-staters doing? Because we came here to be Texans, man. I washed the Illinois off when we got here. I'm good to go. Now, the great part about moving from Illinois is nobody asks you why. They just kind of give you that understanding of like, I don't know. But basically, we moved because it's a terrible place to live. If nothing else, we lived in a state where corruption is our biggest export. And you're welcome for that, by the way. Because now it's all y'all's problem. But when we were deciding whether or not to move, I remember sitting down to dinner with my wife one night and I said, "Sarah, we've got to get out of this state. We just have to. I don't even care if it costs us everything we own." Then we got into the process of moving. And I found out that it was going to. It didn't end up quite costing us everything, but it was close. What we learned through the experience is that it is very expensive to leave the state of Illinois. By the way, does anybody know why it costs so much to leave Illinois? No, it's because it's worth it. It's worth every penny, let me tell you. Now, following sort of a similar idea here, we have had in this country hundreds of thousands of selfless men and women who have given their lives to protect and defend our freedom. Right? We celebrated a lot of them on Friday, didn't we? D-Day.
Yeah.
Not only that, but we have who knows how many people like you and me who follow the news, try to hold our politicians accountable and protect our liberty here at home. It takes an extraordinary amount of constant, vigilant effort to be free in this world. Now, do you know why it costs so much to be free? Because it's worth it.
That's right.
Nothing in this life worth having comes easy.
That's right.
And freedom is one of the greatest blessings that God grants us in this life.
That's right.
So it is incredibly hard to keep. That is why we need people like you and me to follow the Constitution. Because our politicians will never voluntarily abide by limits on their power. We have to know exactly what the Constitution means and demand that they obey it. Now, I know that seems like a big ask, right? To think that people will stand up tomorrow and suddenly start reading their constitutions. But we have to find out how to do that. Because we have no other choice. Understanding the Constitution, understanding our liberty, is simply the price that we have to pay to be free. The question is, are you willing to pay that price? When you leave here today, are you going to take that next step to learn more about the Constitution and make sure that you're prepared to defend your freedom? I hope that you will. I promise you. It's worth it. God bless you.